And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your chilly Friday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So, 38 years ago today was my bar mitzvah, when a Jewish boy becomes a man. And there's a lot of Yiddish and a lot of prayers and a lot of old relatives that told me about life. And now you're going to learn, Jer. Maybe someday you'll make a young lady very happy, or maybe someday you'll make numerous young ladies very unhappy. There's a lot of different things that are said to a young bar mitzvah boy. But today I will not tell the very long and tawdry and sordid tale of my bar mitzvah on December 13, 1986. It's not really that sordid or tawdry. It wasn't that great of a day. I did okay. It wasn't that great of a day. But 1 year prior, on December 13th, 1985, saw the release of a movie, an immediately identifiable film, IP, before everything was IP. And instantly, holy shit, Warner Brothers figured they were going to have a huge hit. They made a movie version of the classic Parker Brothers board game, Clue. And they teased it, the big cast, a lot of great names from Tim Curry on down, Madeline Kahn, Martin Mull, and who else was it? Colleen Camp. Yeah, the names will just pop into my head as I remember, Leslie Ann Warren, as I remember the different characters. But they teased the movie by saying that they had different endings. They were trying to drum up as much interest as possible, even though you would think they would have had a built-in audience. But they teased that there were going to be 3 different endings, but only one of those 3 endings was the real ending, for whatever that's worth. So with all of that, the film hit, and it didn't do very well at the box office. Got okay reviews, not great, but okay. The film should have done better. I don't think that marketing plan worked. They thought they were going to get people to come to the movies more than once. They had enough trouble getting anybody to go the first time. So the film more or less disappointed at the box office. I mean, it was $15 million to produce and market. So we're not talking, even for the time, of outlandish budget. And oh my God, it only grossed, 32% of its production cost. It almost broke even. But there was a lot of disappointment. And I would say, without looking up any numbers, at a different time in history, if it had been, let's say, even 5 years earlier, the film would have never found an audience. But in the suddenly enormously profitable home video market, first there was Betamax, which didn't really catch on. The technology was a little weird and a little weak. It took until VHS for them to, it's always the second generation of a great idea. I shouldn't say always. It's usually the second generation or second iteration of a great idea where they knock it out of the park. And the difference between Betamax and VHS, quantum leap. You can argue that the difference between DVD and VHS was an even greater quantum leap, but that's a story for another day, and perhaps even the kind of podcast episode where I would have a guest who knows a lot more about these kinds of physical media versus digital media than I do. I've never studied that in particular. I could just give you opinions. But Clue the movie, similar to other films of the 80s, such as Blade Runner, I think the greatest science fiction film ever made, unless you consider A Clockwork Orange science fiction. But that's a film that vastly underperformed at the box office, despite Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford and Rutger Hauer and Sean Young, the great cast, the unbelievable visuals, the incredible story, underperformed at the box office. But because of home video and HBO and Cinemax running it, same with Clue the movie. Clue the movie became very popular. It's the kind of movie you can watch with a party, with other people. It didn't catch on as far as the midnight movie like Rocky Horror Picture Show. That's the ultimate sort of midnight movie, audience participation. But there is an element of Clue where if you've seen the film 50 times, it can almost seem interactive as you shout instructions at Tim Curry or Martin Mull or Leslie Ann Warren or whoever it might be. Or Christopher Lloyd, I forgot. Same year as Back to the Future. Boy, you want to talk about a guy who was fucking killing it. Christopher Lloyd playing the Klingon commander in Star Trek, The Search for Spock. He plays Professor Plum in Clue. I think did he play Plum? He might have played Green. But then he plays the role of a lifetime, Doc Brown. Both Doc Browns, 1955 Doc Brown, 1985 Doc Brown. But the film found its audience on home video and cable and began building a significant cult following. See, I don't call Blade Runner finding its audience, building a cult following. Blade Runner was a masterpiece. It was an extraordinary film from first to last. What Ridley Scott put in theaters, the so-called theatrical cut with Harrison Ford's kind of half-assed voiceover narration, still a masterpiece. That's not a cult movie. There might be a cult surrounding it, but when you say cult movie, it generally means that it's something that found a niche in pop culture without necessarily being high art. And often there is an element of camp. And I don't mean Colleen Camp, the actress who played Yvette in Clue. I mean that there is a certain part of the audience that feels as if the performers on screen are responding to them, are performing for them. Hence, what I said about Rocky Horror Picture Show is high camp. Yes, there's an A story. You know, there's the text and then there's the meta text. The text of Clue is you have a bunch of strangers in a mansion and dastardly doings going on. That's the story. It doesn't have to be a board game. That's, you know, a setup, a 10 Little Indians kind of a setup. But the campy aspect is the kind of overarching performances by the cast that Leslie Ann Warren is chewing it up the whole way through. Whereas there are other actors, such as Christopher Lloyd, who play things a little more close to the vest. Now, normally when you have a clash of styles, as I've said, American Beauty, it doesn't work. Not that the movie's terrible, but Annette Bening reading her lines as if she's in a comedy, contrasted with Kevin Spacey reading lines as if he's in a Bergman film, it didn't work for me. But in Clue, the movie, you have Tim Curry and Leslie Ann Warren just so far, Madeline Kahn, I forgot about her. They are so far over the top. Madeline Kahn seems restrained compared to them. And when I think of Tim Curry, I think of, there's a lot to choose from, but Rocky Horror being, Frankenfurter or whatever. But I think of the way that he was milking every second of screen time in Home Alone 2. Just the way that when he's on the phone, "Sir, I'm afraid you're mistaken." It was just like he was wringing every possible ounce. Campiness, he's doing the same thing in Clue with the big smile, the eyes, the way that he's dressed. It's fantastic. I prefer his performance in Clue way more than what he does in Home Alone 2. There seems to be a little bit of revisionist history that Home Alone 2 is better than the first one. No, it's not. Give me a break. It's not. I will, that's a hill I'll go down on. It's a remake. It's a remake of the first movie. And by opening it up, I understand why they did that. They didn't want it to feel like a remake. It doesn't work. I feel no emotional punch at the end of Home Alone 2. None. It doesn't mean the film wasn't entertaining. I saw it in theaters, unlike the first one. But Tim Curry, in this movie, he's driving the bus. And he hadn't, other than Frankenfurter, which is a supporting role. It's a rare opportunity to see just how versatile he is. That he is by turns funny and charming and frightened, sinister. It's really a great performance. And does it follow the plot of the board game? I guess. It's the name of the name of the characters and all of that kind of stuff. But it is an interesting case study, a film that is now beloved, that was a beloved piece of intellectual property. I love the game. Once again, I'm going to put on my old man hat here. and point out that for sheer entertainment value, whether it's a party, whether it is simply a family gathering, I mentioned bar mitzvah, so many of the older relatives are gone now. I mean, everyone from the first generation, everyone my grandparents' age, they're long gone. But there are treasured memories of playing games such as Clue with people who are no longer with us. And that adds to it. That added to it. Why I even wanted to see the movie, because a lot of people say, it's not good. When I rented it, I thought it was fantastic. And something that ended up being very smart, it seemed to have been a mistake with the marketing of Clue to talk about 3 different endings. Well, you could argue it was a mistake to even have 3 different endings. Michael McKean, I think he plays Plum, now that I'm remembering it. I think he's Plum. You know what? He and Christopher Lloyd, I haven't seen the movie in quite some time. But it may have been a mistake to do the 3 different endings. But VHS, they included all the endings on the tape. So if you rented it, you got to see all of the different permutations. And from a certain point of view, it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure, Dungeons and Dragons kind of a feel, where you decide, well, I prefer ending B. Up yours. Well, I prefer ending C because, well, it says that that's the real ending. Up yours. Same thing. You choose. Choose your own adventure. Choose your fate. Choose your character. Choose who you want to emerge victorious. Do you want Tim Curry to be the ultimate winner? Well, there you go. Would you like it to be Leslie Ann Warren's Miss Scarlet? Okay. Do you want it to be Mr. Green? Do you want it to be Professor Plum? All right, let's rock and roll. So the movie sold very well on VHS, and it was hugely popular just as far as rentals. And if you're under 35, I know it's difficult to imagine a world where people fought for those VHS tapes. Tapes were either priced to rent or priced to own. That's a phrase that is not ever going to be used. It's only going to be used by people like me explaining what does it mean price to rent or price to own. Well, for example, let's say that Back to the Future and Clue, let's say they both hit VHS the same week. They didn't. Clue would have hit VHS later than Back to the Future. But again, I don't know the numbers on this. I don't know the dates. But hypothetically, let's say that Back to the Future is priced to own, and Clue the movie is priced to rent. It doesn't mean that you can't do one or the other. But in this instance, if Back to the Future is priced to own, in 1985, going on 86, it probably would have been early 86, or maybe they released it for the Christmas season. But priced to own, in 1985, it would have been retailing at your local Target or Walmart or whatever you had in 1985, TSS Seedman's, if you really want to date me here, it would be $20. Now, $20 for a movie, a physical media, a tape that goes like this, that's a fucking outrage. That's a lot of money. Now it would be insane. People bought those copies like hotcakes. Price to own means reasonably priced for purchase. Doesn't mean you can't rent it. It means reasonably priced for purchase. Now, the closest approximation just of that is, for example, Clint Eastwood's Juror Number 2, which I did an episode on it. Nobody knows what the hell David Zaslav was doing, only giving it a limited release when the critics were going crazy. It's going to be up for Oscars, no doubt. But you go on to Amazon Prime. Juror Number 2 doesn't premiere on Max until a week from today. But you go on Amazon Prime. If you want to rent the movie, I think you can rent it for $8. If you want to buy it, the digital stream, it's $20. So that's a little bit of a price to, what's the price for rent, the price to own. So in our example of Back to the Future, it's $20 to buy in December of 1985. Okay. Let's just say that Clue the movie is priced to rent. What does that mean? You're going to think I'm making this up. They would have a VHS tape and they would have it selling for like $80. That's what price to rent meant. So in this instance, people weren't going to be buying the VHS of Clue. They will be renting it 50 times as frequently. Whereas Back to the Future, there were plenty of people, maybe you'd seen it in theaters. Hey, if you want your own copy, you want your own copy. But I don't give a fuck who you are. If you're spending $80 to buy a VHS tape of Clue in the mid-1980s, I'm sorry, you really got taken to the cleaners. But Clue had so many fierce defenders and so many people who wore out their VHS tapes. They just kept watching it. It's that kind of movie. It's silly. It has a lot of memorable dialogue, and it has talented performers, in most cases, giving big, broad comic performances. And because Tim Curry didn't necessarily get to do that kind of juicy role where he's driving the bus that often, I mean, the movie Legend, same year, right? The Tom Cruise, speaking of Sir Ridley Scott, and that was a movie that unfortunately got butchered by the studio. The same guy that almost fucked up Back to the Future, Sid Sheinberg. Let me tell you something. I understand Ridley Scott was not the old guy that he is now. He was in his 40s, okay? But you have a guy like that who had made Alien. He had made The Duelists. He had made Blade Runner. You let him make his movie. You hire a master, a guy who was already acknowledged one of the great filmmakers. You hired him to make the movie Legend. Tim Curry plays basically Satan in that movie. He's called Darkness, but it's the devil. Like it was the fruits of the devil. No, it's the devil. You can't see Tim Curry under all that makeup. Could be anybody under there. But Tim Curry fucking crushes it in that movie, but you wouldn't necessarily know it was him. When you know it's him, okay, the voice, fine, some of the movements, maybe he's doing a Frankenfurter thing. But he's so good in Clue. He looks like he's having a ton of fun. And I often, when they talk about how a certain movie was probably, the actors probably had fun, I don't usually agree, because most of movie making, as Charles Grodin pointed out, as the late great Oscar-winning screenwriter William Goldman also pointed out, most of the life of an actor or actress is sitting in the fucking trailer waiting to be summoned. That's 90% of what you're doing. But Clue looks like the actors, for real, all had a blast. All of the principal performers in that film, they all look like they were having the time of their lives. And that kind of enthusiasm, it's just strange that the film didn't do better with critics. I mean, most of the local, I think the New York critics, I don't know that any of them gave it, even marginal thumbs up. Maybe 2.5 stars was the best. I don't know what Siskel and Ebert said. I feel like Ebert gave it a thumbs down, which would probably indicate that Gene did as well. I don't think any of the big critics, whether it was Rex Reed or David Anson, I don't think that any of them were like rapturous, sorry for my cat, were rapturous in their praise of this film. But it is a movie that, not just because of the cult following, but it's very well remembered by history. But it's another one also that people would assume was a box office hit. And there are films I've talked about which were somewhat of what you would call hits, but not as big as you would think. And Clue goes into this same category. A movie that didn't really land properly. It didn't stick the landing when it came out. It should have, but it didn't. But what it also shows is that just because something is recognizable, we all had, I shouldn't say all of us, most of us of my generation played this game. And you fill a cast with so many colorful performers. And you tell a pretty interesting story. Like if you haven't seen it, if you just know the board game and that your father, or I hate to even say it, your grandfather or grandmother is a big fan of this movie. It's not really that far-fetched. He really loves Clue, the movie. But if they tell you to watch it, if they hector you into watching it, they bully you into watching this film, I am quite confident that you are not going to be expecting anything that you see. There are a lot of twists, a lot of turns, and a lot of really clever surprises. This is a film that plays really well on first watch for that reason. Now, what I was going to say, though, about IP, and now it all looks real easy because you have a built-in audience. But this, from a certain point of view, was a cautionary tale because they did everything right, trying to craft an interesting story with twists, the multiple endings thing, which at another time would have been a huge success. And they had such a terrific cast, people just didn't go to see it. And then you looked at the next year, George Lucas, Howard the Duck. Really? Howard the Duck? Oh, it's a misunderstood masterpiece. It's Citizen Kane. No, it's Howard the Duck. That was IP. There were a lot of people that loved that comic book. But it showed in that decade, even with the incredible super success of Superman the movie and Superman 2, Superman 3 really wasn't very good. Just because something was a known commodity doesn't mean that people are going to plunk down their hard-earned money to see the film. You've got to do more. You've got to get them into the theaters. It's not enough to just dangle something that they've seen, something that they've heard of. So from a contemporary perspective, I think that Clue is free on streaming if you're interested in checking it out. Or maybe it's a movie you haven't seen in a decade or two. And you know what? I kind of was, I'm not going to say on my phone, because if it's 20 years ago, you may have just been doing something else. But it's the kind of movie that it kind of passes a certain way, and you don't necessarily have to be completely engaged to kind of get a kick out of it. Maybe you watched the movie where you were focused on something else. Give it another shot. The film plays really well now. It's a sort of movie that doesn't have to be 2024 or 1985, because if your setup is, and there are elements in the movie of James Whale, The Old Dark House, one of the great horror films ever made, even though to call it a horror film, you would say, well, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's in the genre of what we expect from a haunted house movie, even though is it really a haunted house movie? Or is it just a kind of scary big mansion in the middle of nowhere and a fucking storm and people coming in out of the rain and a really creepy, eccentric family? This guy's a weirdo. That guy's a weirdo. That guy's really fucked up. Maybe we ought to leave. But that movie, you had the character of a butler. The Tim Curry character in this movie is much more colorful, but the phenomenal silent and then sound actor, Ernest Thieseger, top 10 greatest line readings in history, comes in The Old Dark House, which, as I said, if you watch that and you watch Clue, you will say it's about 30% the same movie. It's beat for beat. But Ernest Thieseger, he's this kind of miserly butler. It's not even his money, but he doesn't even want. He has these travelers have come. It's raining and a thunderstorm, and everyone's cold and they're hungry. They've just arrived, and he's kind of feeding them food, but you can see he's just trying to skimp. And somebody says, maybe offer them another dish. The way that he says the phrase, have a potato. Have a potato. Have a potato. Could have given him an Oscar just for how he says, have a potato. So as I say, Clue, the movie, I think is on HBO Max. I know it was on Paramount Plus. Maybe that was a co-production. I don't know that it's ever been on Netflix. There are certain recognizable movies of the 80s which for one reason or another never seem to hit or land on Netflix. And then there are other films that just months and months and months, it seems like they're just part of the permanent roster. Clint Eastwood's In the Line of Fire and Arnold Schwarzenegger's Total Recall over the last 5 or 6 years. There have been enormous chunks of time where they were just on Netflix. I don't remember Clue the movie, at least in the United States, ever being on Netflix. If I'm wrong, you can light me up in the comments and say, no, bro, in 2022, whatever. There are certain movies where it sticks in my head that maybe I was a little surprised that, oh, look at that. The Natural with Robert Redford is on Netflix, that kind of thing. But Clue the movie, incredibly, released 39 years ago today, 1 year to the day, before yours truly, as Grandpa Nat said, you become a bar mitzvah. 1 year before I was bar mitzvahed on December 13, 1986. Clue the movie opened in theaters, disappointed at the box office, but went on to develop a deep, devoted, and very loyal cult following. This has been episode 380 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your chilly Friday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.